Let me introduce our distinguished panel today, and then then Farooq and I we will moderate this discussion. So let me begin first close to home. Amie Haughn is joining us today. Welcome, Amie. She is the Director for Employment, Nova Scotia, Department of Labor and Advanced Education. Uh, she's a she's a big time supporter of what we do here at the Center for Employment Innovation. Actually, the program that I talked about, the future of work and workers, they are supporting that program and also these webinars. So thank you for that, Amie. Amie is an experienced leader. She provides strategic and programmatic support to government programs here in Nova Scotia, and she has spent a decade. Over a decade in the government. First, currently she is with the Department of Labor and Advanced Education, where she handles programs on employment and labor markets. But prior to that, she's worked with the Department of Economic, Rural Development and Tourism, where she worked with a cross section of government department, but also community groups and community economic development groups and organization to collaborate on creating and implementing regional growth strategies that impact job market as well as business climate. So we would love to hear from you, Amie, and thank you very much for your time. We have then Mr. PVG Menon from India. Thank you, Mr. Menon. Welcome. Who is the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of Electronic Sector Skill Council of India. The Electronic Sector Council works under the aegis of National Skills Development Corporation in India, and they work closely with the Ministry of Electronics and Information and Telecommunication. And since its inception, Mr. Menon's organization has trained over 1.2 million youth across the length and breadth of the country. So we would love to hear how they do this skilling work at such massive scale. Mr. Menon is a thought leader in the electronic systems design manufacturing industry in India with over 3 decades of experience and has participated in several industry initiatives. He's passionate champion of Indian industry pursuing IPR, product-led approach to design, world-class electronics, and his logo is for India and from India. Mr. Menon also has a rich experience in development, marketing, and management of technology, has worked with leading IT and IT companies where he has built multi-million-dollar global businesses and run globally distributed teams. So thank you very much, Mr. Menon. I will get back to you once I introduce our third panelist. So first of all, Venu, thank you very much for just standing up and helping us, because Amit Vatsyayan, who was going to participate in this webinar, he got sick and he couldn't participate. So thank you very much. You just agreed and you are here today. Venu Jayachand is Associate Partner, Government and Public Sector Skill Development, and she looks after the Africa, India, and the Middle East region at ENY. And she's part of the leadership team at ENY, looking at skills development practice for over 28 years of experience in skill development across multiple sectors and geographies. And in her current role, she's working very closely with the federal as well as the state governments in India and across the region. And then she also works with multilateral agencies, global foundations towards this goal of skill development and mandates across getting this across the region. Prior to this, she also has several, and I hope I'm doing justice to your background, Venu. She has held several leadership positions in various corporate settings. She was the CEO of Navkar Skill India Initiative. It's an entrepreneurial venture. She was also part of Centum Work Skills India. It was the first public-private partnerships venture for skill development in India. And she was also part of Reliance Infocomm, and also with Crimson Logic Private Limited in Singapore. So she has this extensive experience of working with the government and working in the skilling field. So welcome all three of you. So I will be facilitating today's discussion with my co-facilitator Farooq. Farooq and I go a long way back, almost 15 years. We have taught many courses here at Coady, but besides teaching the courses, he is also a social entrepreneur. Farooq, you want to speak just 2 minutes about how we have developed this course and what we are going to cover today, and then we will open it up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Yogesh, and it's so wonderful to see our guests with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. I think in terms of the course that we've tried to work on, we've really tried to put together some of the big issues that we think are affecting and influencing the future of work. And in order for us to be able to do this, we took some historical context and perspective. We talked a little bit about the history of work itself. We talked a little bit about the different industrial revolutions, a little bit about how the labor movement and all of the changes and challenges it has been through over the last little while. So we tried to put that into some perspective. We did a bit of a deep drill down into some of the key technology pillars we think are shaping and influencing the future of work. So we specifically went into artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning. We spent some time looking at advanced robotics and 3D printing. We spent some time unpacking the Internet of Things, augmented and virtual reality. And then more recently, we've been doing blockchain and cryptocurrency. And I think since then, we've had a couple of other conversations. We've been talking yesterday about the role of the education sector, specifically looking at some innovations in Africa, where they have to deal with a very large population of young people and how they're going to leapfrog to some solutions. And we thought all of this kind of situates really well for a conversation today about what role government plays as we think through the future of work and workers as well.
Thank you. All right, so let me first begin with, you are the last one to join, Vinu, but I'm going to begin with you first. So just from your point of view, just paint a picture, future of work, what you are seeing, and we actually shared the report that ENY did with our participant, so they have known about it. But just like tell us future of work and your role and the role of the government.
Thank you for having me here today, and it's really a pleasure to be a part of this forum and to share about something which I've been closely working with for many years, and therefore it's really a pleasure to have joined, and even if it was at the last moment. And good morning to everybody and people in different time zones. Greetings, and I think very opportune moment to actually get into discussions such as these. Obviously, this is something which we've been hearing across forums, across stakeholders. These discussions have been going on because we've seen the work already evolving in terms of so many changes, so many disruptions which are happening. And I'm not necessarily talking about COVID being the disruption, but of course that has been one of the key disruptors in the recent times. But then where we've been working and we've within the region and specifically at the country, we've been able to look at very large scale implementation for skill development. But I would still say that some of the challenges that skills as a sector, as a function are pretty astounding. So it's not something which we've been able to overcome as we speak today. There are technological changes which I think you've spoken about, Farooq has spoken about, in terms of what you've dwelled deeper into in your earlier sessions. But the nature of changes which these technological changes have been able to bring about, the number of jobs which exist out there, the demand consolidation which now needs to happen on on a very consistent basis. Because if you are talking about technological changes, and then the demand around whatever exists in the industry needs to happen with so much of pace, that we constantly need to be at it. Whether it is about the demographic changes, if you look at it globally, there are pockets, there are actually clusters, there are regions which are aging, and the kind of strategies that we need to look at, the kind of policies that we need to do for those places are very, very different and diverse from places which seemingly have a demographic dividend. So be it Africa, be it the South Asia, which definitely are sitting on an opportunity for a demographic dividend, but it's not currently a demographic dividend, I would say. Then, of course, so many trends, around green jobs, so much is happening around the climate change, waste management, etc. New kinds of jobs are coming up all the time. Urbanization, which is completely, sort of changing the way or the places where the jobs are happening and the kind of jobs which are happening. So a lot of these changes which we've been seeing are going on. But I think the important thing which I wanted to really table right at the start is that, in this entire scenario, what really needs to be done is the context of all these disruptions, and the most recent one being COVID and the way we are working, needs to be looked at from a point of view of agility. So there has to be a flexibility and agility in our thought process, in our strategy, in our policy formulation. And the critical role which the government needs to play is essentially of being as agile. I mean, even if we were to take a very broad parallel with the IT world in terms of the agile development of things, I mean, that's exactly the way it needs to be. Whether it is about quickly changing policies, schemes, responding to the supply side requirements, the learner requirements, changes in pedagogy, the changes in the demand side consolidation, getting partnerships with industry across countries. So I think a lot of agility and flexibility is something which the governments have to come up with. And I think that is something which we really need to work on, which probably has to have a huge collective effort of the entire set of stakeholders. So I think I'll start with that. Of course, we'll build on these themes subsequently.
Thank you for that big picture context, Vinu. I think we will definitely like to drill down more on the skilling part, and particularly in particular your experience of NSDC, working with NSDC and others. But now let me just bring Mr. Menon into the conversation, because you touched upon and we all touched upon technology and how significant the role of technology is in future of work. And Mr. Menon has spent a professional lifetime in this area of technology. So may I just, Mr. Menon, just tell us from your vintage point, future of work. What do you see as priorities for your organization, which very closely works with the government, and the role of government as you see it?
Thank you, Yogesh, and greetings to everyone. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to be on this platform. I think for countries like India, the challenge is going to be how do we address the issue that we have a very, very young population, a large population, and we have to create about 1 million jobs a month to make sure that our youth have an opportunity to actually participate in this economic growth that we want to achieve. There are a couple of things that are happening where the government is, it's much more than the future of work. I think it's the way in which, and I'll talk with reference to India, but what I'm saying will also apply to certainly to other developing countries. Probably it's applicable across all types of economies. What we are doing in India through things like the Digital India program is to use digital technology to drive an agenda of inclusive growth. And we have taken what is called the JAM trilogy. So there is the universal banking. We have been what is called the Jan Dhan accounts. We've opened up hundreds of millions of bank accounts, and sections of the society which were not banked have been brought into the fold to make sure that there is identification. The unique identification number has been assigned, and we have more than 1 million Indians now who have a unique identification number. And the M is mobile. So the government is trying to use mobile services, mobile technology to both provide services to citizens as well as provide connectivity back into government services. Now, if you start with that, from where I come in from a skilling perspective, there is one fundamental premise that we are operating with at the Electronic Sector Skill Council, which is across the National Skill Development Corporation's agenda, which is we need to skill people so that they can get jobs based on skills, not necessarily based on degrees. And once you do that, you take the pressure off the higher education system, make sure that youngsters who are coming out of the schooling system can divert into getting useful, gainful employment and start earning. Very, very important in countries like India, which have a large population who need to be, able to start earning incomes fairly quickly. I have been a long proponent for many, many years now of the fact that every manufacturing job that is created leads to secondary and tertiary employment. And so it's, the multiplication factor from a manufacturing job that we create is manyfold as compared to, let's say, a services job. What we're doing is preparing our youngsters in the electronic sector to go out, learn some skills which will get them either a job which helps to build electronic products in India. And we have a way in which we create standardized, we standardize on job roles together with industry. Then we create a standard curriculum across the length and breadth of India. You could call it the McDonald's approach to skilling. But whether it is, whether it is Kashmir or it is Kanyakumari, whether it is Saurashtra or Silchar, you will find that a person, a boy or a girl who's being skilled on, let's say, an assembly line worker profile, or let's say a service role to repair an air conditioner or a mobile phone, it is exactly the same type of skilling which is going into training that young person, boy or girl, and making them ready to work in industry. Obviously, the scale at which we operate, India is a very large country. We are present in 29 states and 7 union territories of India, 7 out of the 12. So at that scale, we build an entire skilling ecosystem. We have education entrepreneurs that we call training partners. And what we do is prepare the curriculum and train the people who will go out and train the youth. So train the trainer program. Parallelly, we develop a second ecosystem of what we call companies which will do assessments. And there is a question bank that is created. The people who will actually go out and do the assessments are trained. So training of assessors is done. The question banks obviously have to be kept, refreshed on a quarterly basis. As you can imagine, at the scale at which we operate, 4,000 training centers, 7,000 trainers, 700 plus assessors. This is a massive effort that goes on. And everything is under the National Vocational Qualification Framework of the government. The core objective, Yogesh, is how can we make sure that a young person who's coming into adulthood has an ability to become a productive earning member? Because let's not forget, every manufacturing job in a country like India, with where we have a very large section of the population who are poor, every manufacturing job leads to societal transformation, because that income represents food, represents medicine, represents school fees for siblings. And I can go on and on about all the fantastic things we do on infrastructure, but end of the day, as as Mahatma Gandhi said, you have to look at the face of the last man in the queue, and look at what you're doing and how it will affect him or her, and change his life. And that is essentially what the skilling ecosystem is all about. I can keep talking to you about all the technology aids we bring in, but the final goal is societal transformation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Menon. And I think as we go further, we would definitely like to learn more about that last mile outreach, how you actually do that. How do your 4,000 centers, how do they actually do the community outreach, that last person standing in the line? And how do you sort of offer that package service? So we will definitely come back to you on
Sure.
that. Everybody across, I think, would like to learn about that. Now let me come back to Amie. Amie, just and I know your work focuses on a lot on the local economy here, which has its own challenges. So working from the government and within that system, can you just tell us, like, in terms of future of work, what are the priorities you are seeing, and what are some of the challenges that you are observing, and the responses from the government?
Sure, Yogesh. I want to preface it just slightly with a little context in terms of traditional role of government in Canada and how that does translate down into the provincial role and then the regional roles, and how we're doing that work, if I could just for a second. So just to give everybody that picture of Canada has had a history of 100 years of a back and forth between federal and provincial government around whose role it is to play in development of labor market and employment services and programs in our economy in the nation. And that back and forth is a very interesting history, of which I won't get into all of it. And I'm certainly not a scholar and historian, so I put that caveat on it. But the story of the Canadian evolution of the types of services that we now provide in Nova Scotia is really important to understanding where we are today, the history of it. So the unemployment insurance system that was created around the 1940s and the Second World War is the impetus for what I'm operating in and we're operating in Nova Scotia. And so understanding how that's evolved and where that's come from and then where it needs to go has been really important to looking at our future approaches. But in Canada, the belief is, in terms of the system, is that government has a role in helping match supply and demand of people to need in terms of industry's needs, through information, placement of people, and active support measures. And where our province works a lot is in that realm of what we call active support measures. So I think I need to take a second, just tell you what those are, so then you can understand how they work, because the theory behind them, the intent behind them, also translates into government's role and how we do our work and what space we believe we have in it. So a long story around the back and forth between federal and provincial governments is that in the 90s, the federal government decided that the approach would be for employment services and labor market programs that provinces would take on the responsibility under a process of, some of you would have heard of this, called devolution. And apparently that word, I'm not even sure that it is a real word except in the context of government. So I just want to define that for folks. Devolution, it was a term that was developed to describe a central authority maintaining control, either through legislation or other means, and then transferring the power. So the federal government wanted to devolve employment programs and labor market responsibilities to provinces in the 90s. And as it was doing that, it took over a decade to do that across the country. And various provinces came on board with that quickly. Others resisted completely. And Nova Scotia was one of the last provinces to take on and finally do the devolution process. There's lots of reasons behind that, I think, and I don't know all of them, but I did start working in this space in the 90s. So this is where the story gets kind of real for me. I was an employment services provider for about a decade, and I was on the other end of the equation that I'm now on. And so what happened was with the devolution and with the framework that we were all going to work under, it was called a federal provincial labor market development agreement. That provided the basis of what every province would offer in their provinces, but it gave the provinces a lot of latitude about how it would offer those things so that it could tailor its approaches to its province, to its economic circumstances. So I often wonder in my role, because sometimes my role seems very large some days and very small other days, how the federal government would have done that from a centralized position in the federal government, really thinking about regions. We have a very regionalistic thinking in Atlantic Canada at the very least. And knowing that if we could get into Nova Scotia's issues and opportunities, and regionally within Nova Scotia, if we can get into Nova Scotia's issues and opportunities, we can make some change versus broad-based policies, broad-based programs that are cookie cutter, one size fits all. And that's where the federal government is, admittedly. They will say that. That's where they are. They set a program policy or a program type. It's for the nation. Here you go. There's a couple variabilities for a region. So this gave the province a lot of freedom to develop its approach. And that was in 2009. So my division, Employment Nova Scotia, was birthed in 2009 by the provincial government to take over the services that had been previously delivered by the federal government, which included employment services, providing services to individuals who found themselves unemployed or maybe needed to look at a different career journey. In addition to that, it also looked at the demand side and working with employers and helping stimulate growth and possibly innovation in various aspects. And then, so that's where the supply and demand kind of work comes into with government. So we have an agreement with the federal government where we have guidelines in terms of what it is we can do with a transfer of about $90 million a year to invest in that supply and demand shifts. There is and I think I saw Jordan McDonald's name on the webinar. Hi, Jordan. Jordan introduced me to a book that it was like reading the things I've lived through and known and seeing it in print. And it is Donna Wood's book, just in case folks are interested in Canada's journey, called Federalism in Action, the Devolution of Canada's Public Employment Service. And it talks about all this history I'm giving you in much more detail. But in Donna's book, she points and says the role of public employment service in Canada is to enhance the functioning of the labor market by effecting more timely and beneficial labor market adjustments, that would otherwise occur, that would not otherwise occur, rather, by ensuring a more efficient and more equitable labor market. So the reason I raise that context and history is that I do think it explains the approaches that we find ourselves in when we find ourselves in a pandemic and needing to shift as well, that in Nova Scotia, we aren't all that panicked about how to do that work because we've been starting to do that work for the last 10 years in that space provincially and leaning into that. So some of the other comments that were made by speakers, like the agility and flexibility in policy, yes. We are very much there. We are shifting policies and flexibilities continuously with an improvement in equitable labor market shifts and leaning into that role. So as we lean into that role, the environment we're in doesn't become all that scary to us when we're there. There's another paper that might interest folks as well. Came out of the University of Ottawa from Michael Bryson, 2015, from the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. It's called Employment Insurance and Active Labor Market Policies in Canada. So that the Labor Market Development Agreement contains active labor market programs, and then we in provinces need to develop the active labor market program approaches and policies to that. And that means is that active labor markets, as he states, I just love how he put this because it validates the world I live in. I read it and go, absolutely, that's what we're doing. Active labor market programs facilitate the reallocation from labor from contracting to expanding sectors, movements, the shifts. Active labor market programs help people move from one sector to another, in contrast to passive policies that provide assistance to persons in declining sectors. So it's a passive approach, and may impede the reallocation of labor from declining to expanding sectors. So we operate in a space of skill development programs for individuals in the province that are across the province, that have standard sets of policies that will help make these shifts come true on the individual's basis. But then we also have many programs that we're working with industry, particularly with sectors. So there's a system of sector councils in our province that represent the major sectors in the province. They take a leadership to work with industry and to work with us and government, determining where sectors and industries are headed and what is needed, what they're able to do on their own, what they feel they need help from in government, and then how the labor supplied in my world also connects to those sectors. So this might sound a little utopian, but we're told, Yogesh, as we go across Canada and talk to other provinces even, the statement is often, our province here is this amazing size to incubate this type of work and this way of working in government, with sector, with industry, and with individuals. We have just less than 1 million people in Nova Scotia. To just put the pandemic in perspective as well, up until very recently, we were in a very unique bubble of, I think the word would be blessed bubble of having very little COVID impact lately in terms of health, and also in terms of the recovery in the province around the changes that had to happen. So we have around 500,000 of that population I spoke of in our labor market, 500,000 people. And we have right now, as of the latest stats yesterday, 44,000 people unemployed in Nova Scotia. And 12,000 of those are somewhat attributable to the shifts in the economy. So these are numbers that in our context, in our working world in the province, we can actually wrap our arms around, our head around, our mind around the individuals who find themselves unemployed. And that's where I think maybe the last thing, you guess, if I'm running out of time, is our employment services system is one that, when that devolved to us, became a real local effort on our part with our community-based service providers, who are not-for-profit organizations, who have visions and missions to better their communities and to support people returning to employment and thinking about their future work, who lean into communities and are starting to do that more and more to figure out in each region, in each community in Nova Scotia, who is unemployed, who needs our help the most. And Nova Scotia's government priorities are vulnerable individuals, including underrepresented persons in the labor market. So we've got socioeconomic goals as well, in addition to just unemployment.
Thank you. Thank you, Amie, for presenting some sort of the historical context, but also the current realities and why just a cookie cutter approach is not the best way forward. Okay, I think let's bring the focus to skilling. I think all three of you touched on skilling, and let me sort of go back to. I think this would be a question for all three of you on the demand and the supply side. So maybe let me begin with Venu. So in terms of looking at the demand, what kind of skills are required in near future? How and I know you have approaches to identifying those priority sectors and skills. So I would like to know from you, Venu, how you look at that across the state as well as central government. Then also, I think you talk about cross-functional skills. Okay, so you can talk about very technical skills in different sectors, but you also you very strongly focus a lot on cross-functional skills. So can you give a bit more light on that as well?
Sure, absolutely. So I think benefit of our work with different governments has been that, we've been able to identify the priorities which many of them have. And, it's not something which is, which is similar. So when skills did start, as a complete program, a national program, the focus was around scale and standardization. So everything was around scale and standardization, how quickly we can go about bringing that in. But if you look at it today, we've pretty amply delivered on the scale. We've been able to create a huge amount of institutional capabilities across the country, across sectors. We've been able to go delve deeper into, different kinds of sectors, the job roles that we've been able to create, the qualification frameworks that we've been able to map to. So all of that has happened. A large degree of standardization has happened because, we've been able to processize the entire value chain for the skilling side, etc. But I think the large focus which needs to happen going forward is around the demand side. So while the scale and standards has happened, it's still, delivered probably about not a very optimum percentage of employability. So there is a huge amount of work which has happened around creating so much of capacities, but then the employment generation may not be commensurate to the kind of efforts which have gone ahead. So therefore the demand side definitely focused around in the times to come. Now on the demand side, if I were to look at it, today organizations, I mean, where we are working with many corporates, today organizations are valuing more people who are multi-skilled. The whole concept of the skill front loading, having one skill to begin with, and then just sort of living through that, living through your professional life with that one skill is really being challenged now. So a multi-skilling option is something which most organizations are looking at. So some of the shop floor, if he or she has a couple of skills, they convinced with the adoption to such people. The kind of requirement which on the demand side which corporates have is actually also on their language skills, life skills, the corporate working kind of a scenario that they come in with, because many of them, which I even heard, from Amie speaking, that, the vulnerable sections are the focus for the government programs. And, you would come across very many challenges as far as the language is concerned, as far as the corporate awareness and employability skills are concerned. So I think a lot of focus or a requirement basis on the corporate side or the demand side is really around those. So if we are talking about multi-skilling, if we are talking about multi-skilling, we are talking about the language, the soft skills, the digital skills that are very primary to any organization or any sort of demand that you're trying to supplement with. Then I think one more critical area that we probably need to focus on the demand side is that it's demand will constantly keep evolving or keep changing in terms of the nature of skills, the the way in which organizations are getting into work contracts. So there's with the entire gig economy side, there's a huge amount of freelancing happening, a lot of outsourcing, contractual work, etc. happening. So that side of work also needs to be looked at, and many a times the governments get limited, because the understanding of what is employment, whether it is only wage employment, whether it is a contractual employment, becomes a challenge. So therefore it is important to understand overarching impact of demand. Is it only from a wage employment side, or we also need to actively look at entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is looking at creating livelihoods. It's for the person as well as the associated ecosystem around. So I think on the demand side, therefore, an individual is required to have definitely the domain skills, but I think more importantly, all the elements of the language skills, the soft skills, the employability, overall the employability skills, as we term it. In fact, many governments in the country have recognized that. I mean, one of the large states in Bihar, in India, which is Bihar. I mean, we've been able to the government has actually created a huge program only, and that's not a job linked program, that is only towards creating an IT literacy, therefore the digital skills that we are talking about today, the language skills, the English speaking skills, as well as the soft skills. I mean, it's a complete curriculum which is offered to everyone, from the age of 15 upwards to 35, and close to about 1.2 million people have already been through that system of getting trained, getting skilled, certified. And that's something to overall enhance the employability of the person. So I think we should not really limit the focus only onto planning for domain. It is something which we need to look for from a context of a larger requirement, and that is what will drive the demand. Because if we were to only look at domain, there are very many means of organizations getting the domain skilled people. So it is something where we need to drive the demand, make this entire youth attractive enough, so that it gets the organizations are motivated to take them on. So the pull rather than the push. And I think demand, therefore, needs to be looked at very, very differently, and keep a constant dipstick around what are the changing trends, what are the changing. So, for example, the study which I'm sure most of the participants here have gone through, the kind of changes which are envisaged in the near future. I mean, across sectors may vary, but the foundational principle is that the changes are going to happen. The whether it is for the ITES sector, whether changes are going to be radical to maybe textile, other areas of apparel and so on and so forth, where it may be little less. But then the fact is that we need to have a complete pulse around what are those changes, and constantly bring about changes in curriculum, content, the physical dimension of where the training is happening. So the labs need to be constantly updated, upgraded, so that you're able to constantly fulfill that demand in the most requisite manner. And I think those are the aspects that we need to probably look at from a demand side.
Okay, thank you. And you also, I think, touched upon and some of the supply side as well. So let me bring Mr. Menon in here, because particularly looking at looking within the digital economy, and then preparing the workforce for the digital economy. And Mr. Menon, you talked about working across country with 4,000 centers, 7,000 trainers, and that too reaching out to remote rural areas. So that's where the real demand is, a real sort of workforce is that you need to prepare. So so just tell us, how do you actually match what the industry wants, what the Digital India wants, with what kind of supply we have in terms of availability of labor?
Sure. Let me break this up in a couple of different ways. So how do we look at demand? There is a labor management information system, which is essentially a tracker that is running. My goal is to make sure that we update it every quarter. But right now we sort of update it every year. And that is done by constant dialogue with industry. Now, if you look at electronics manufacturing, there is a slew of incentive programs that the government of India has announced for sort of Make in India. This is particularly as we look at moving supply chains and de-risking our supply chains from our very large Eastern neighbor. And we're trying to move a lot of the electronics manufacturing into the country. Now, these incentive programs over the last 12 to 18 months have resulted in expansion of capacity happening in the country. Mobile phones, we are today the second largest manufacturer of mobile phones in the world outside of China. And that has led to massive employment. But equally, we are seeing demand from employers rising across other product categories in electronics. I'm not speaking of other areas. There is a problem that the skilling that we are doing right now, and I think Vinu touched upon this, that how do you make sure that the training programs are kept up to date? Let me be very frank. I wish we could react faster to updating our curriculum. And we are all, let me be honest, we're all scrambling. At least 25 to 30% of my time is spent identifying new training partners, looking at is there a way in which I can access some of the newer equipment that is being brought online in the various manufacturing zones. Not every businessman who invests gets orders to sort of fill this capacity, and so there are lots of interesting business models evolving where we are talking to units who are not fully loaded to see if we can utilize a part of their capacity for skilling. These are ongoing discussions. On the other hand, we do have a constant push from particularly the provincial governments. The state governments have a problem that they have to skill the youth so that they can get jobs, and there is a push happening from that side. And the challenge when we skill youth from a state government or a central government scheme is how do you create jobs for them? How do you place them? What we have been able to successfully do, and this is something that we will be increasing in the days, is we have created a micro entrepreneurship strategy around, particularly around our service job role. So if we train someone and certify someone to be, for example, a technician who repairs air conditioning units, or someone who installs and repairs set-top boxes in a home. We also give them training on how to run a small business, become an entrepreneur. As we say in India, convert them from being job seekers to being job creators. There are schemes available from the government, and we typically put them in touch. Most provincial governments have facilitation agencies, and we make sure that our training partners will hook these youth onto the help desks, if you will, for these entrepreneurship development schemes. This is on the lower end of the skilling spectrum. The Electronic Sector Skill Council has started in the last 6 months, and we will accelerate as we go forward to move into higher skilling roles, where we're looking at also working with graduate engineers. And at that stage, we are now linking up with incubators and accelerators so that graduate engineers who have a desire to become founders of companies can be helped. And most of these incubators today will provide services such as, for instance, how do you form a company, chartered accountancy services, legal services. Those are available on a sort of, pay as you use kind of model. The sector skill councils, I can speak for electronics, but I'm sure the others are also doing it, are working with these incubators to also create a panel of industry experts who can mentor some of these startups in the high technology space. So that's how we are looking at, how do we look at the demand side? One, work with industry and fulfill the needs that are coming up, and constantly, work on our curriculum, work on how we deliver the training, because bear in mind, this is experiential learning. There is a practical learning. I can't do webinars like this and teach someone how to solder a component or how to, assemble a mobile phone. They need to be on the shop floor kind of environment. But for the more technology intensive startups, let's say somebody trying to do a chip design firm, for example, the model obviously changes. So that's how we're doing it. Now, coming to the supply side, there are, the way we do the reach out is our network of training partners are present in all these locations, and they work with the schools. We hold job fairs, which are quite widely publicized, and people come in, they get a little bit of counseling. They either get picked up or they get diverted to skilling areas. What we call in India, we call them Rozgar Melas or employment fairs. What we are also doing now is, what we see the state governments doing is, we realize that, end of the day, I cannot reach out to all the 600,000 plus villages. I mean, there is no way I can put a training center where there is a concentration of, let's say, 50 people. So a lot of these training centers are coming up in small towns, small cities. And what the state governments are now doing, we are in discussion with at least 2 of them, and they want to build hostels where they say that these youth can come in, we will house them, we will feed them, and we will subsidize the training. But we are being told that in addition to giving them skilling on, let's say, electronics, you also have to teach them soft skills, what Vino was talking about. Because otherwise, remember, these are youth from very, very remote rural areas. So I've seen a video where people had no idea how to, for example, a 18-year-old boy from an interior rural village has no idea how to behave in a factory environment, all those kinds of things. So soft skills are also being taught. And finally, as the skilling ecosystem progresses, as other speakers have talked about, we are now looking at how do we do multi-skilling. Bear in mind, this works for service roles. For manufacturing roles, companies still want people who are very, very good at whatever it is that they do on the assembly line. But for service roles, we're saying if somebody knows how to repair an air conditioner, then why not teach that boy or girl how to repair other gadgets, anything that is available in a house. And so we give them multiple skills to be learned, and they are certified on that. And the ESSCI has also, very early days during the pandemic, during the lockdown, we had invested into building an aggregator app for some of these technicians. And we have that now rolled out on a small scale. Bear in mind, for me, small scale is approximately 2,000 people are on the app. And we've got this rolled out in some of the northeastern states in India. And, the goal is in the future, I don't know whether we will do it ourselves. It's very early days, but can we do an Uberization of technicians who will repair electronic gadgets? There are multiple platforms available. They're usually concentrated on the 6 metropolitan centers in India. The other towns are simply not served. So I don't know. These are early days. It's, it's just a rollout that has happened. And that's how we're looking at it from both the sides.
Mm-hmm. And these apps, people will be able to access services, not hire full time, but just access the services that they want.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. Amie, same question. You already talked about the sector councils that we have. So maybe just talk about how those sectors councils function, and then the role of the government within those, and in terms of identification of the demand and linkages with the industry, but also on the supply side.
Sure. The role of government in them is that we fund them, I believe, 100%, the sector associations and councils. So when you look at role of government, they exist primarily because that investment is going there, because we understand how it fits into that role that we have overall, that we need industry to be working on the issues and opportunities they have themselves, and also feeding government what are those issues and opportunities, and then working with us and very closely with us to figure out how government can appropriately support and where industry needs to take the lead. There's 12 of those in the province. So we have a span across, I've just got them up on my screen and I'll send them to you folks in the chat so you have them as well. Building and renovation, automotive, manufacturing, a community sector council for community-based, not-for-profit organizations, digital, Nova Scotia. So this kind of cross-cutter across a lot of sectors and themes, but digital skills are part of their mandate as well. Healthcare, boat builders, construction, fisheries, tourism. So it's basically, it takes the entire province's economy and puts it into sector councils that are built by and run by the sector themselves and interchanges with us. And then how does that translate? I would say in Nova Scotia, remember talking about our size of this, just shy of 1 million individuals and people in the province, that we have this fortunate space of being able to work very closely with each of those councils to understand what those opportunities and priorities are. And it's very iterative. And I think that goes back to one of the themes that one of our speakers said right out of the gate of being agile, nimble. It's very iterative. And it's not, our government doesn't come out with a plan from each of these sectors and we're going to do this and this and this and this. And here it is. Then it's presented in April of the year. It is an ongoing process with each of those councils, working directly with a division within our branch called Workplace Initiatives Division. And then we are the recipients in our branch and others about that information and how to work with sectors appropriately. Some of the themes that we're hearing are ringing true in other countries. So essential skills, those skills that aren't necessarily taught in a program but are needed as foundations, are key priority for our employers in Nova Scotia. Recognition of prior learning is key in Nova Scotia, and in the non-traditional sense of learning, right? So outside of post-secondary opportunities or training opportunities. The government of Canada is also, their essential skills taxonomy is being enhanced right now. And their new framework for skills that will be coming out shortly, I believe it's 2021, will include, because we all kind of take that taxonomy and work from it in all the provinces and across all sectors. It's going to lean into the idea that jobs and labor market information get presented alongside of essential skills, and so that it's less that technical skill degree. What do you need when you look at labor market? You're trying to figure out as an individual, how do I break into a particular profession or into a particular sector or with a business, and get businesses to think the way that we've been discussing here today as well, around how do I value the skills without the piece of paper, the certificate, the credential kind of process. So that we have programs as well that we actually stimulate that happening faster. So government employees who have a program called One Journey program, where they will approach companies within these sector conversations and within opportunities in local communities and say, would you like to do a matching program? Can we bring a cohort of individuals to meet your need, and we will help you train, help you skill? So bringing the resources to bear, both in terms of expertise as well as money, to help them do that, so that we can help them grow and help the unemployed and individuals who, as we mentioned earlier, are vulnerable, underrepresented, and top priorities in the province get connected to employment as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Amie. I have some questions, but I see there are questions coming in the chat, and participants want to ask. So let me call some of them as well. So we have broader participation. So Fatima, you want to go first?
Okay, thank you, Amie. It was very interesting. Thank you, Menon. My question is completes the question of Yogesh. So I'm working for the International Labour Organization. So we are currently working on the same issue, on the anticipation of skills. So we have little bit the same approach. And just this morning, we was discussing with government which kind of committees we can set up to follow and this process. And really, our objective is how to ensure that this approach is appropriated by the government and national partners, and how what's kind of committee that we can set up and can continue after our technical assistance. So that's why my question for you is, who lead this process in your case? Is it led by this private sector or by government? For example, for our case, we hope that when we work with private sector, we hope that this sectoral committee can continue after and become a committee which will anticipate skills and create employment within the sector. So this is the first question. The second question about the selection of sector. It's how do you select the sector? You are working on all sector, or you have already select? It was a politic choice or technical choice, because it's very important. Thank you.
Okay, and your questions are to everybody, Fatima?
I think they were directed to Amie.
And Menon. Thank you.
Okay. You want to start, Amie, first?
Yes, I do. So first of all, who leads? So the 12 that I mentioned, 12 sectors, didn't magically appear in one fell swoop of 12. So it was, that was an evolution. And some of it started with industry itself having some form of some forum that it, and eventually became part of a system, we'll call it, of sector councils. And others were government instigated because we saw gaps. And often how government sees gaps is when industry would lobby government for a lot of different things, but not have a unified voice, and come at government from various angles with lots of asks and lots of chaos, to be honest. And when you see that in government, often we say, how can we harness the good intel that's happening there, but in a positive way? And when it's unorganized, it's never positive. It just isn't. So it was a way to, by times, and these have emerged, the 12. But it was also, they are representative of the majority, I'd say 90% of the economy is captured in those sectors that you see as our sector council mix. So there's not a political end to it, I guess it's fair to say, other than as public servants wanting to hear industry and respond to anything that is coming up, we need this kind of structure to do it productively, to move into the action that I think you were asking about as well. Like, how do we then determine what we work on? So I mentioned earlier about it being a little iterative. It's not as if we have a master plan for all 12, and at a certain time of year, we need to know what the plans are to move the industry and sector ahead. These sectors work at a bit of their own pace, a bit of pace setting with us because we fund them. And as key things are emerging, we're working with each of them around plans and revising those plans on an ongoing basis with them. So it is very industry led from that regard. I will say, in terms of government's embracing this or resisting it. What I think I'm understanding from with our Canadian context, not all provinces do it this way in Canada, and not all provinces have comfort doing it this way in Canada. And there is a cultural element of which in that resource I mentioned earlier about the history of Canada and Donna Wood's resource, her book, culture has a lot to do with how we do this work in our jurisdictions. And so some provinces are not comfortable leaning in that far and they want to lean out. We have leaned in. And part of that I would also contend is because we have resources to do it, meaning Nova Scotia is not in a scarcity position concerning its labor market programming resources and transfer payments. We went through a transformation of services 4 years ago for employment services, found some cost savings and better investment in those ways. And we're not afraid of investment. So if you are in a jurisdiction where your resources are scarce and there's a lot of competing demands and it's disorganized and they're all coming at you, it's quite easy, I think, to stay away from industry a little bit more, put an arm's length there so that you're not leaning in. But Nova Scotia doesn't find itself in that position, and in fact have found it to be a productive way to work with industry. I hope that answers some of your questions.
Vinu, you want to take a stab at that as well?
Sure. So I think on both the questions which Fatima had, on the first one where we are talking about who leads, so it's not really, and we've seen some very large scale programs in the region. I mean, I'm not talking just about India, overall the Southeast Asia region. I mean, who leads where you're talking about, it has to be both. It cannot be the private sector alone or, the government just by themselves. So, whether it is about the demand aggregation itself, which is really coming from the industry, the market relevant skills, what are those cross-functional skills which the industry requires, is something which is known only to the industry. So, by delinking the process, we are going to only create something which is a redundant system, something which doesn't really address the requirements of the industry. The demand side is not getting fulfilled. So I think it's important, therefore, to have a complete synergy between the government as well as the industry on the private sector. What I referred to earlier, the scale and the standards. So the standards, fine. The governance process, the institutional mechanism, the entire policy framework is something which the government really steps in with. Of course, under the aegis of being flexible, agile, etc. But if you look at the scale, the kind of adoption, the kind of outreach, the kind of employability or outcomes which we are envisaging out of this entire program, is something which the industry is only going to be able to bring about. So I think it's something where it has to be worked around completely in a synergistic way. On the which sectors, so I think one, of course, is there are very clearly priority sectors, which every state would have, every country would have, every province would have, so those priority sectors, of course, are known. But I think two other factors which probably need to really be looked at is, the context of the future investment and growth perspective. If we are talking about the country, and there are future growth perspective, whether it is around manufacturing, like for example in India, there's a huge impetus around the manufacturing side, the Make in India campaign, etc. There's a huge stimulus package which has been created, for the agri sector, for the fisheries, for the forest sector, for the manufacturing sector, for the tourism sector. So wherever the growth is, those are some of the sectors that we need to prioritize, rather than where we feel that jobs are, we'll be able to get some quick jobs right within an immediate framework. So rather than choosing those ones, it's important to also bring in the investment perspective. And I think one very clear thing is, the migration. so we should not forget the aspect of migration, whether it is within the country or it is about global migration. So if we are talking about overseas opportunities, we need to address those opportunities. So for example, if EU has about 150 million jobs, which it is envisaging in the next 4 to 5 years, or if the entire G countries have about 52% people who are migrant workers, we need to address those sectors as well. So it is something which where we will have to have an outward view around it. So while planning, it is very critical to look at these aspects also.
Thank you. Veena.
Thanks.
There's a very active chat, so I'm trying my best to pay attention to that as well. There's a question for Mr. Menon from Henry. He works in the Senate of Canada with Senator Lankin. Henry, if you can turn on your mic and ask your question.
Sure, happy to. I might not frame it as well as I wrote it down there, but essentially I'm coming at this from a slightly different perspective of just employment standards and legislation at the federal level, unlike Amie. And we're trying to push for a study on the gig economy here in the Senate. One of the issues we've been looking at is, yes, of course, we want to have a more flexible 21st century job market, and that includes some of the technologies that you mentioned, Mr. Menon, and bringing some kind of Uberization to other business models. But the problem we see is that people who are already in the gig economy today do not have the same protections that people who have standard, traditional jobs. Obviously, we're not going to go back to 9 to 5, unionized jobs in every area, although that might be nice. But the question is really, if we do move towards a model where a growing number of people are in the gig economy, and I'm asking in particular in this case, in your experience in India, what role is there for the government in ensuring that people who are working perhaps part-time gig jobs, they do still have access to important labor standards, such as being able to have good quality pay, some kind of job security, some kind of, I know it's for us in Canada, we have 2-tier health insurance systems. So some things are government covered, some things are from your employment insurance. So I'm wondering to what extent this expansion of the gig economy might create gaps in terms of services for individuals. What role is there for the government in that? And do you see any harms in that potential evolution, or any thoughts? Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Great question. The problem we have at this point in time is, at the last count, we had 23 million people who lost their jobs just because of the lockdown. And we have massive, not just unemployment, but we have massive underemployment. We're also trying to move a significant portion of the population out of agriculture into either manufacturing or services jobs. So if you'll pardon me for being cynical, our first priority is to get jobs out to people. As far as how do we ensure wages and so on and so forth, for micro entrepreneurs, the market decides what the pay is. Bear in mind, I am working in a sector where we are skilling people. So these are skilled technicians, and there is a certain demand supply gap there is out there. People, as we create jobs, as more and more people come into the income stream, and this is a young country. Our median age is 25. So more and more people are coming into the economy, and they're starting to earn. The first thing that I often say that the first thing that a young person does with his or her first salary is to go out and buy a mobile phone. And then they go and buy a television. So our objective right now is to skill these people so that they can go and get a job. as far as do we see legislation coming in? At some point it will. We've seen when the Uber story took off in India. At some point, the individual drivers who were driving in there got together. There was some industrial action to safeguard their rights and so on and so forth. So I think in many cases, as far as India is concerned, we have legislation catching up with the market as it moves. I'm not an expert in that. I'm restrict myself to making sure that the youth are skilled and helping them to get jobs. Either they become entrepreneurs or they go out and we give them jobs in the economy. I acknowledge the fact that this is an important question, but I don't have data to answer it.
Would you like to add anything, Vinu? We'll move on to the next one.
No, I think I completely endorse what Mr. Menon said. I mean, the first thing really is about getting them jobs, with data really getting thrown at us from all corners in terms of, the number of job losses, etc. So I think something really which is of priority. But I think it's a very important point you've raised. And I think some point in time, some amount of regulation, some governance will have to happen. But today we are even struggling, to be able to give a differential wage to somebody who's been skilled and certified versus somebody who just sort of, gets a job and learns on the job. So, when such fundamental areas are still left as a gap, to be able to bring about legislation to ensure, insurance and other benefits, etc., continue to get extended to some extent or whatever is surely going to happen. But frankly, I mean, personal opinion, I don't see it happening very, very soon. I think because the government's got the unemployment problem really large and big looming in front of them.
Okay, so let me pick up a few more questions.
Thanks.
Sarah, you want to come in now? Sarah, you also had a question, right? There you go.
Good morning. I'm going to scroll back to my question. It's a question for Amie. So Amie, I work at Employment and Social Development Canada, and I'm the manager for responsible for the Forum of Labour Market Ministers. So for those who don't know this forum, it's where labour market ministers from jurisdictions across Canada and the federal government meet to discuss employment and labour market issues that affect people across Canada. So when you were talking, you discussed, you noted the ability of services in Nova Scotia to sort of to tailor to, I mean, not quite the individual needs, but the very sort of small local needs of job seekers at every across the province. So as we as a federal government are looking to make investments in labour market development across Canada, in your view, what are the kinds of programs the federal government should be focusing on, and how can we help provinces and territories scale up to achieve labour market development goals for Canada as a country? Like, I want to just sort of like, we often talk about local economic development, but from a federal government perspective, we really want to see the entire economy of the country grow. And I just wanted to get your views on that.
Sure. Sarah, we were asked in early days of COVID, this is a good lesson, I think, from everybody about how governments work together. In very early days of COVID, ESSCI reached out to the provinces and asked a little bit of what Sarah is asking, but Sarah, it was in the context of our labor market development agreements that we have. Was there anything that we felt in our provincial jurisdictions that we needed to be able to respond to Canadians better during COVID? So now, to give everybody an understanding, I think that that's a huge move for the federal government to ask that, and very nimble and very quick, because labor market development agreements are those standard agreements across the country that, Sarah, you probably agree, don't change all that often, and with a lot of ministerial discussion at both levels. So that to happen very quickly and to be asked that, what do you need? Because whatever you need, we're probably going to be able to help you get there. it's a labor market development need. So we had provided feedback, and I'm trying to rapidly remember, Sarah, what we said in our feedback, but we actually, as a province, and again, this is culturally, each province looks at their agreement with the federal government very differently. Nova Scotia's had a very amicable relationship with the federal government and working with them. And our response was, we actually feel like we have a lot under this. We see our way through, and just so people understand, under that active labor market program possibilities that are part of an LMDA agreement, we have a list of things like skills training. We can take our money. This is what this says. We can take our money, invest in skills training, ranging from basic skills to literacy to numeracy, on-the-job training, group interventions for job readiness, financial assistance and benefits and living allowances, employment counseling and services, labor market connections that facilitate matching supply and demand, employment opportunities of experiential learning, development on the job, employer-sponsored training, and the list goes on. And so I think, Sarah, our feedback is, I can't remember it. My generalized comment right now in the context of this course would be to say, we were saying we feel like we're okay. We felt like we were okay as a province, that we had the lanes that we need in the province to use the funding that we have to do the work that we need to do at this very moment. Now, in terms of forward thinking, maybe post-COVID, if we can ever think that way, and what that would be, that might be a little bit of a different discussion. But where we are right now and under our current labor market development agreement, and maybe that's because as Nova Scotia, we've been managing our funds very well and we feel like we have enough to do our work. Our response was, we understand the flexibilities that already exist in our labor market development agreement, and we're fully leaning into them. Other provinces haven't been, and they don't understand some of their flexibilities or how they can work within that, and they feel like they're restricted in ways that quite often our liaisons from province to province look at this agreement and what we can do under it and tell other provinces, are you sure you can't do that? Have you really checked into that? You might have a limiting belief on your agreement with the federal government. So I know, Sarah, that wasn't very specific about what, but right now, Nova Scotia feels like, I know I'm speaking for our leadership when I say that, feels like it's in a good place with its labor market agreement and what we're doing with it.
Thank you, Amie. And we are right at 10:30, and I want to respect everybody's time. So with a big note of thank you to our guest speakers, Amie, Mr. Menon, Vinu. I think some of the big takeaways for me, we can almost conclude that skills is the new currency for future of work. So there is no disagreement. We all agree that skills are required for future. New skills, reskilling, upskilling, lifelong learning, those are the key buzzwords for the future. But also important, as Mr. Menon said, the jobs for future are going to come from skills, not necessarily from the degrees. And also, I think what Amie and you said, Vinu, that government's role is very, very crucial, and governments need to be very agile in future of work. So with that, thank you very much. I thank everybody else who also joined today. Thank you for your inputs, contributions. And for our class, we will see you next Tuesday at 9 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.